All right, so we're going to be going over the coordinate plane. This is a sixth grade standard, so you probably have seen it and are familiar with it, so it should be a review, but make sure you're staying with me as we go through this video. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is just label our coordinate plane. Now the x and the y axis are already labeled for you, but if you would like to highlight them, again, the x is going horizontally and the y is going vertically. I always think of that y stem is like my long axis here, okay? The origin, we need to remember, is at 0, 0, the very center of the graph. And then we have our 4 quadrants. So in the top corner, I just want you to write quadrant 1, quadrant 2, and in 7th grade, we will ask you to write them as Roman numerals, quadrant 3, and quadrant 4. If you forget, I always think of the coordinate plane starts with a C and it goes in a C shape. It starts with quadrant 1, 2, 3, 4. It goes around that way. So it's counterclockwise. The second thing I want you to do is I want you to label right next to your x-axis. The x-axis, if we go on the right, it's going to be positive, and if we go to the left, it's going to be negative. If we go up on the y-axis, it's going to be positive, and if we go down on the y-axis, it's going to be negative. Another way students think of that is that everything in the first quadrant is positive, positive, right? Everything in the second quadrant would be negative, positive. All of my x-axes or x-coordinates would be negative, and my y-coordinates would be positive. Then we'd have negative, negative, and positive, negative. So you can think of it that way as well. Just a few different ways to organize the information in your brain. So, when you are plotting coordinates, it's always x and then y. So the first thing we have to do is move on the x-axis, right? And here's my x-axis. So we're always moving side to side first before we move up or down. So let's try the problems on the page. The first one says 3, negative 4. All right, so again, I know I'm plotting my x first and then my y. So if I start at the origin, put our little signs back here. If I start at the origin, that means I'm moving on the x-axis first. So I'm moving 1, 2, 3. Not every graph is labeled. This one obviously is. So make sure if it's not labeled when you're counting, you don't start here at 1. You go 1, right? You don't count until you've moved 1, 2, 3. And then it says negative 4. So we'd be going down, right? Down 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. That is the only place we were putting that. We're not putting it at, some students want to do like 3, negative 4 this way. But that would be negative 4, 3, because again, it always goes side to side first and then up or down. All right, let's try B, negative 1, 2. So if I start at the origin, I'm going to go negative 1 to the left and then positive 2. And that would be B. Okay, C is negative 6, negative 5. So I start at the origin. I'm going to move negative 6 on the x-axis first, and then it's a negative number, so I'm going to move down 5. And that would be C. The next one can be a bit tricky for students. 0, negative 3. So if x is 0, that means I am not moving on the x-axis. I don't move side to side. So if I'm not moving side to side, then the only thing I have left is up or down. If it's a negative 3, I'd move down 3. Some students want to put that point here, but this point would be negative 3, 0. So really think to yourself before you do those, am I moving on the x-axis or not? If it's 0, I am not moving side to side. Similarly, for E, change up our color again. We have 5, 0. So I am moving on the x-axis 5, but y is 0, and y is up and down. So if y is 0, I'm not moving up or down. And then lastly, we have F, 2, 4. So those are both positive. I know it's going to be in the first quadrant. I start at the origin and I move 2 and then up 4. And that's F. All right, great. We're going to move right along. This one asks you to put what quadrants these coordinates are in. Now you could just look, okay, -5, +3. I know that's a negative positive. And you could look at the first thing we did and said, okay, well, anything negative positive is going to be in the second quadrant. You could also graph it. So if I start at the origin, I'm going to go -5 because I move on the x-axis first, and then up 3, also in the second quadrant. You could do it either way. Okay, so if you do 6, -2, I start at 0, I'm going to move 6 and then -2, that's in the fourth quadrant. Also, I could just say, okay, well, it's positive, negative. Anything positive, negative is in the fourth quadrant. Anything negative, negative, what quadrant is that in? That should be in the -1, -6, third quadrant. And finally, a positive, positive. I mentioned this on the last 4, 5. If I'm at the origin and I move 4 and then up 5, that's going to be in the first quadrant. All right, moving on. You might also get one that's on an axis and that's not in a quadrant. Okay, so let's do this one. 0, -3. If I'm at 0 and I'm going 0 on the x-axis, that means I do not move side to side. But then I'm going -3, so I go down 3. This is on the y-axis. It's not in a quadrant. 6, 0, I'm going to move 6 on the x-axis because x is 6, but if y is 0, I'm not going up or down. So this is on the x-axis. And finally, sometimes you might be given a table and then you have to graph. So usually you don't get this column here, you just get these points. It's the same exact thing we've been doing, just in a different way, in a different format, I guess I should say. Okay, so that means that this is -4, +6. And this is -2 for x and +3. So this is just a different way to write the coordinates. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and graph those points and you graph them with me. I'm going to start at the origin. I'm going to go -4 for the x, +6 for the y. -2 for the next x, +3 for the y. 0, 0 is at the origin, then +2 for the x, -3 for the y. So then I have this nice little line. It might not always make a line, but when we get to our functions unit, it will. All right, so that brings us to the U-Try. So I'll have you do those questions, and then when you are done, you can get it checked. Great job.